Jane Wong is a poet, a scholar, and the creator of the Poetics of Haunting digital project. Inspired by her scholarly manuscript on the ghosts of contemporary Asian American poetry, Going Toward the Ghost, the project grew into a TED Talk, a digital collection of haunting poems, a record of conversation with Banu Kapil and Sally Wen Mao, and a piece written in conversation with Teresa Hak Kung Cha's archive. Of her powerful debut poetry collection, Overpour, Full Stop writes, "There isn't a page without arresting imagery and a suggestion of forceful, generative life." A former Kundiman and Fulbright Fellow, Wong is an assistant professor at Western Washington University, so she came out all the way from Washington State. Thanks so much for coming.
Wow, it's so great to see everyone here, including my high school English teacher. Where are you? Hi, Mrs. L. I still have to call you Mrs. L. It's so weird. It's so great to be here. Actually, when I was 16, I found myself here at the Asian American Writers Workshop, just heard about the space and just wandered in here sort of accidentally. And this is actually the second time I've been here. I don't know what took me so long, but I'm super glad to be here. So thank you all for coming out on this kind of wintry night. I'm really excited about hosting this event, which kind of engages what I kind of did for the last 5 years. I did a PhD at UW, and my dissertation was on this, on the Poetics of Haunting. And I really wanted it to be also a digital site and not just like rotting on a shelf somewhere. How I even came up with this idea, or kind of if I were to distill all the things about this project into just a few minutes. When I was in college, I was taking a Chinese politics class, and my professor showed a video of like a documentary of Mao's Great Leap Forward, or like a section of it. It was one of those moments where I was kind of like in school, and which is kind of clinical, and looking at these images of kind of mass starvation and cover up afterwards too, of what happened during that time period around 1958 to 1962, I had to like put two and two together. My grandfather was orphaned, and he was basically adopted by another older man who was strangely lost all his family too. And so I was just like, oh, huh. Like, how could he be orphaned, and how could this man have lost all his family? And no one actually mentioned that they probably starved. And that's what happened. And I ran out of that classroom right after that documentary moment, and I didn't come back, and my professor was freaked out. But it was one of those moments where I thought to myself, something's still haunting me. I grew up in a Chinese American takeout on the Jersey Shore, and I would like eat voraciously as a child. And it's like this weird feeling of like eating on behalf of the dead. Because my family starved during the Great Leap Forward. And that basically led me to this project, which is, why do Asian American poets, and that can be broadened to other poets as well. And so the project draws a lot upon African American poets as well, and the Middle Passage. But what is this kind of need to return to these events and these histories, these traumas that you have not actually experienced yourself, but it feels like you did. And it's a lot of intergenerational trauma, and kind of coming back to these themes again and again. So this project really engages that concern. And for me, it's a matter of haunting, like you're haunted by it, versus witness. It's not witness, you weren't there necessarily, but it feels like it just happened to you. And the one thing with this project is that I want to emphasize that it's about these poets going toward the ghost, and that to reclaim one's history is not to, in many ways, let it go by the wayside. There's a lot of creativity in terms of going towards this ghost, towards these haunted histories of sorts. And it's okay to get it wrong, too. What do you do when the facts are erased? When the government doesn't even want to acknowledge that this has happened? You kind of have to make it up. So what I discovered through this project, and you can kind of play around, if you hover over some of the elements here, you'll come to like a few words like I remember, or to construct the maze house field. Here, this is real life, not a story. These are lines from poets that I examined during this project. And if you click to one, such as "To Whom Do You Belong?" click into it. That's Anime Wong. Here we have, oh, Christine, look at that. I just actually randomly chose one, but Christine's is here. So you can kind of scroll down a little bit, but I asked a lot of these poets to just include ephemera, things that felt very connected to their kind of own histories. And this is a collage by Christine here, and a short excerpt from a kind of lyric essay, Family Teachings here. So explore. I really welcome you to explore this website later. There are great poets in here, and I feel like, interestingly, and this is a question I'm going to ask later, they're all Asian American poets who identify as women, and that's kind of curious to me. Like, what does it mean for women to hold this trauma in particular? So I hope you enjoy it, the event tonight, but also the website. It's just very simply poeticsofhaunting.com. I want it to be as easily accessible as possible. So yeah, enjoy it. Some of my very favorite poets are up here, and I'm super excited about introducing the poets here tonight. Okay, without further ado, I'm gonna introduce Carlina, who I just met tonight. So really great to meet you in person. You have great hair. Anyway, Carlina Duan's debut. Oh my God, I think I'm losing it. It's okay. I'm time zone switch right here mode. Collection of poetry. I wore my blackest hair. Wrestles with the growing pains of Chinese American girlhood and racial consciousness. Fanny Troy writes, I wrote my blackest hair. Duan's speaker navigates diaspora and its incumbent losses of family, of language, of face, with unflinching care, revealing complex textures and concrete magic. Carlina is a 2016 Fulbright Grant recipient and is currently an MFA candidate at Vanderbilt. Her work has been published in Uncommon Core, Tinderbox Poetry Journal, the Berkeley Poetry Review, among others. A huge round of applause for Carlina.
I was told this microphone is very fun. Yeah, it is. Great. It's very fun to use. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you so much, Jane, for hosting. I feel super honored to be reading with all of the poets here. Asian American Writers Workshop is a space that I have admired a lot from the lovely depths of the internet. And so it feels especially magical to be here with all of you and to be getting to share my work. So thank you so much. I'm just going to read a couple poems here. So I just had this book come out, which is really exciting. And in thinking about the themes of sort of haunting and ghosts, I think a lot about the good ghost and sort of the wicked ghost of language. And so that is something that I grapple with in these poems that I'm going to share with you tonight. And this first one is called Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is where I'm from. Yes. Ann Arbor, Michigan. On my tongue, clove and ginger, spit, a shimmer, flecks of black pepper. In another country, friends I love grow out their hair. In another country, my grandfather's ashes press primly beneath the ground. I'm lonely here when all around me lemongrass grows. Out of my throat, noises swim. I howl and I howl. A woman calls me by another woman's name. Franny, she says. I am not Franny. I am brick, elbow. With my mouth, I swallow wrinkles of light. In my armpits, there are clumps of black hair. Men call me. I do not call them back. I tilt my chin. I slice a lime, firm green disc. I hold it nicely in my hands. It is the lunar year. There is a gold moon. I check my horoscope. I check the news. Bullets, ghosts that trail the dirt, disguised as cups of milk, sparrows. I check my sister's face. This is what wonder must be, filled with holes, a moon, a gold rush, pigtails. Once, my Chinese grandfather died. Once, I barked, a wild animal. Once, a man said, "This isn't a cultural study, this is a literary study." And I touched the tips of my hair. I slammed my face into the window of a school bus where, in the back, boys chanted, "Who let the dogs out? Who, who?" And the glass cooled me, my stern wrist, my sterner heart. Every day, there was a wall. There was a wallet. There was my mother packaging miantiao by the sink. Breath in the morning, breath in the afternoon. The way history comes back to haunt me with a plump fist. The way my mouth, a cave, opened and closed. My family told me, "Do not forget it," and I did not. My love for lamps, my love for noodles, my hurt when they lashed my name with their throats. China, China, you eat dogs. The wheels on the bus go round and round. We lurch, we lurch. We spit, we spit. We remember our names, carved sharply into the walls. Thank you. Yeah, so like I said, I am from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it's like a really lovely space, especially to be here tonight, because New York is one of my favorite places in the world, just because every single era, I feel like, of my Michigan life is kind of converged also into New York. So it's really great to be able to be here and to share kind of old poems with friends that I've loved for a really long time. The next poem that I'm gonna read is a poem about my Chinese grandmother. And so this poem is called "Morning Comes, I'm Shiny with It," in memory of Waipo. 1. In my dream last night, you wore a boa constrictor around your neck. I touched the scales, sharp green and slick in my hands. You opened your mouth while the creature swam around and around your throat. On your wrist, a thread of blood beneath skin, bluish, strong. We watched the night swell. In my dream, we stood in a parking garage. I cried while animals slipped into you, woodpeckers and poisonous frogs, orange clownfish, too. As a girl, I widened my mouth. You fed me water chestnuts from a spoon and drew eyebrows on my Lucy doll with a black pencil. "Ah, yeah," you said, clenching a ton, and I watched you press into the face, making lines where there were none. This was before the first stroke, before the second, before I visited in summers and Dai caught your drool in a tin pan. Before your arms gave out, you gutted a melon with a broad knife. Juice and seed slathered our chins. I flexed a leg, calling you brave. You asked me if it was true. In Michigan, could I sometimes see eagles? Did I sometimes eat strawberries? Were there or weren't there patches of dumb yellow stars? 3. When you died, I called home from a payphone in Spain where a man tried to sell me ice cream in a pink cooler and I fended him off by mouthing, "Muerte, abuela, muerte," away from the receiver. My pain was glassy and slow. In my dream, I tried to tell you about it, the crackle, the hush, my mom's lawn fever, but you opened your mouth and out flew a pelican, out flew a rainbow trout. A turtle waddled across your tongue, as if to say everything you could not. There now, child, girl, small animal heart, bark, bleat, bray, you won't get her back. The turtle climbed over my toes, and from your lips out flew the hornets, out flew the killer whales. We have her now, they said, clenching their jaws, hatching eggs across the floors. There, they flashed their stunning and terrible teeth. Morning cracked, bright and desperate and small. The animals latched onto you. This one, she is ours now, they said, kissing me with their snouts before the sun broke, and I woke up, my face shiny against a pillow. Yeah, so I'm just going to read, I think, two more brief poems. Actually, I'm going to read one about Chinese school. Has anyone in here gone to Chinese school before in the past? Yes, okay, great. I feel like I ask this often, and usually there's like one person in the audience who's like, maybe, kind of. So I grew up going to Chinese school every single Sunday in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I also grew up like kind of cheating on Chinese midterm exams often. And so this is kind of an experience that comes out of going to Chinese school and trying really, really hard to do well on a Chinese exam. All right. Chinese school, year 7, and Richard and Grant and Gloria and me all cheating on the midterm with the eraser. She writes one character on top, then passes it discreetly to me, and I pass to the others. Chain, shame. There are no Chinese gods on the rooftops, but if there were, they would not be shaped like dragons, nor carrying porcelain bowls of pears. I believe they would get a good laugh out of us with our sticky Dorito fingers and our inability to say their names. Oh, Chinese God, are you there? Are you smoking? Please hear me out. I'm stupid and young, and I like your necklace. I'm asking how come when Emily called me a Twinkie, I could only imagine sweet cream smacked between my thighs, could only godlessly swallow. How come when Emily called me a Twinkie, you didn't say anything about the blessed stuff like my nai-nai chasing a goose for me or how I learned to pickle cucumbers in a tin? Characters grew gummy wings in my throat and refused to flit. Oh, Chinese God, I have a fist. I wanted to be good at this. I wanted not to cheat, but to actually see you standing there in front of the blackboard, mouthing the proper characters for child, for forgive, for tame. Thank you. All right, so I'm just going to read one more poem tonight. And so last year I was teaching in Malaysia. And this is kind of a poem, I was teaching English, and this is a poem that came out of that experience of being abroad and all of kind of the ghosts of history, but also the ghosts of language, like I mentioned earlier, converging in on themselves in this very wicked but also lovely way. So this is a poem called Years. I drink coffee and learn it is a laxative. Toilet seats, ice cubes, songs that remind me of you, songs that don't. The rain is a silver tambourine over my head. In every class I teach, I begin with a proverb, birds, pots of gold, no man is an island. I ask my Malaysian students to define glitter. They make a shaking motion with their hands. In Japan, I meet a white-haired woman who tells me her name means moon. But I'm crescent now, she says. Soon, I will disappear. We wave to each other on the subway. The chairs are plastic and blue. I forget my watch, and the map winks with lines, easy, the 1,000 ways I sit. Bound for Nasu, I watch a mother swipe her child on the cheek. In me, muscle, bone, my sister's nose, my father's tongue, the way he says prawn, the way I wash a well-oiled platter, the way I kiss another mouth, pears, pearls, I bite, somebody pours water into the mug, perfect downfall, wet, bluing squiggles, forget subways, forget I called, when I ascend the stairs, I see a cat near a stray mango tree, I do not shy away, I say my own name, plug my fist into the jar of honey, electrify, disappear, then come home again. Tomorrow, I'll eat, and the years will turn themselves over. Milk, spirals of rain, what we choose, worlds we kiss, everything we leave behind, wrappers, shadows, a mammal howling beneath the street light, licking her own ancient skin. Thank you all so much for having me. It's so exciting to be here.
Thanks, Carlina. I love that kind of note about haunting and language in particular. actually, my part with Teresa Hak-Young Cha in this one actually has me just trying to remember all the words I know in Cantonese, and it's utter failure. Like I actually at one moment just say, I keep saying "ngo meng hai," meaning I don't know, my name is, but and then I by accident say "gao meng ah," which means like I think help. But anyway, I love the idea of like language being haunting as well, and the idea of dead languages quite literally too. What languages are actually lost over time. So thanks, Carlina. Up next, we have Christine. I actually, before I read the official bio, went to college with Christine at Bard like over a decade ago. So it's kind of wild for us to be here together. So super excited to be here with you, Christine. A garden, an intimate and intense look at being a lonely girl, and a shape-shifting feminist spiritual quest of imagined histories. Christine Shan Shan Hou's Community Garden for Lonely Girls creates strange, immutable, new generational mythologies. The Poetry Project writes, Community Garden for Lonely Girls invites readers of all gender persuasions to momentarily suspend the Enlightenment imperative to cultivate their individual plots and embrace the feeling of being disposable and disposed into a mass flower pot. Work from Community Garden for Lonely Girls appears here in my Poetics of Haunting project. And a quote from the project, we talk over each other all the time. We exchange ghosts in the details. Christine is a poet and artist based in Brooklyn, New York. Her previous publications include I'm Sunlight by the Song Cave, Concrete Sound, a collaborative artist book with artists Adora Woollywick, and Accumulations from Publication Studios. Please welcome Christine to the stage.
There's so many people here. Thank you, Jane. And thank you for having me and for listening to my work. I'll read a few poems from my book that came out earlier this year, Community Garden for Lonely Girls, out by Grandma, and you can also buy it in the back. And then I'll close with one or two new poems. All my dead ancestors must be catered to as to avoid angry ghosts. Light switches fade into the sides of cliffs. Eponymous flower, fortunate friend. Mother-child ascends from the womb and into outer space. Beware of linkage when tempting ancestors on battlegrounds. Even my ancestors' ghosts have ghosts. Beware of lab coats worn by men in black clothes. Beware of men and dogs traveling in swarms to eviscerate the needy. Middle child on the beach with a tampon string dangling between her legs, her pubic hair glowing from the drugs, the air thick and moist with old blood of darlings. All my ancestors stand in front of a silver screen like a tribunal. What they stand for is mercurial, material. They grow and stretch. 2 limbs become 4 and 4 limbs become 8, thus the limits of adaptation. I clasp my hands tightly behind my back, puff out my chest for intimidation. I am neither entirely good nor humble on the tarmac. When I was a child, I thought I would have to live in a bubble. I could never ease my own mania. My mother could not protect me. A game show contestant spins a glimmering wheel emblazoned with numbers, and I am terrified. Even my split ends have split ends. The sun palpitating inside my chest, not from pleasure, but anxiety, my place in the food chain. To all my loves, drop globules of fat down my gullet. I want to choke on your grease. Who is out of whose league? To all my loves, I want to fuck you until our eyes turn brighter than snow. I tilt my white ass keenly over the bedpost. I open myself in the moonlight. Hello, round snow. Middle child imitating an insect's immature form, duping men in white lab coats. An insect's antennae sense the silver screen. It sounds like ta 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 ta. My arms tingle when my elbows point backwards. The traffic on Canal Street is a nightmare. My mother and father are a nightmare. My yoga teacher sounds like ta 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 ta. Light switches fade into the sides of cliffs while my ancestors watch from below. Middle children cry and throw themselves off the sides of cliffs by the dozens. Chrysanthemums are holy. A girl is holy. I am a good daughter. This is a longer poem in the book. It's called A History of Detainment. And sex did not create us evenly. The fashion declines statement. And the shit on your face is the history of delicacies. When the disruption of hierarchy deflates us too, the hammering of souls while sealed in fur, and we are elated, happily along for the ride. The cultural significance of feeling sentimental in times of catastrophe. While navigating the meadow of hypotheticals, I tripped and broke my arm. And the drive is incomplete without you. What eyes? Every day it is dark and I am not where I want to be. The movies. Erotic chatter that is hardly the definition of static. Slip hints to the bourgeois, home to the patriotic loon. Fishies swimming home in the dark. The arrival of plentiful. Tremendous healing adapts to the matriarchy. How do you say no to a rigorous saint? How soon until the race is over? We do not mourn the disruption of hierarchy because we want to be up there too. Arrogant children ponder an open sight, a little over a pesky dozen. Anomaly of regulars, emergence of a still life. Vines grow over vines until they become forgotten by the majority. We need to keep the history of detainment alive. How to get there, how to get there, how to get here. The problem of this body is America, and there is an emergency in my computer. Throw a mirror into a swamp, release a soul. In haste, we retrieve the leftovers. They cannot be abandoned. A flossing material, a disguise in blood diamonds. Material empathy overcomes the drooling child. We sleep in the scarlet night. Just because it is not our body doesn't make it a finished product. What does the vagrant want? The role of the poet is a lie. The history of detainment correlates with the history of natural skin. Somewhere out in the countryside, a concept is shrinking. The aftermath of detainment is a blank cage rattling in the desert wind. Do we all want contemporary? The sky opens up and we are split apart. Armless, I emerge reckless. Tourniquet to stop the blood rainbow. To be reduced to hollow refuse. A grove at the edge of a swamp provides an exit strategy. To be held in your grave. Water escapes through the cracks, leaving the fishies to die. The history of prison is the history of love. We place guards around the perimeter, and that is love. Blossoming is a possibility. You can't know if it is possible to blossom in prison if you've never been in one. You can't know how it feels like to die. I conceptualize a peak, and my imagination goes to a valley of amputated arms. Even the now moves with such glacial intensity. Art is the shit on your face. It is pain, but it is manageable. A day job, the movies, the emergency of sentiment blinds us momentarily. The beginning of tea and canaries. Nameless creates a peculiar mound. The mound is oddly precise. A battlefield of corpses is reduced to a concept. We are reduced to a concept. The traditional suicide of, quote, following in death. We cower beneath the steps of God. Our yearning becomes material for tragedy. A body is tied to an appeal. Say no to the appeal. Upset the balance, and a river flows backwards into the rain. Let's see. And I will close with a new poem. What? What'd you say? Oh, yeah. No, it's always so exciting. You're like, I did it. I watched 5 episodes of Real Housewives, but I still did it. Okay. Distant relative. It's okay to sing without knowing the words. An outsider becomes an insider and then disappears with the megafauna. It won't be long until I become the last of my kind and shrivel into the bushes. Tread lightly, do not let sentiment go to waste. A new fossil is discovered to be a distant relative of a horse. A rare medicinal plant produces an unusual smell. Winds carry the scent from one continent to another. What will it take to convince you that I am a woman of science? Tread lightly. How easy it is to become the worst of both worlds. This is for those whose songs we will not know. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. I love the line also, or rather I keep thinking about like, I am a good daughter. I'm like, God, am I? Like, I'm always like racked with fear. Can a good daughter have split ends that have split ends? I don't know. Okay. Anyway, thanks, Christine. Okay, I'm super excited to introduce Muriel next. Last time we saw each other, I feel like we were near cacti or something of that sort. So in a hot world. Now we're in a cold world, but it's hot in here, so that's good. Muriel Leung's Bone Confetti, out by Noemi, is an arresting account of loss and the unresolved nature of mourning and making art. Publishers Weekly calls it an elegant, elegiac debut, instead of saying Dubois, whatever I did before. Collection set in a haunted and highly ritualized space. Kathy Park Hong writes that Leung's poems can be unbearably intimate, yet also epic, transversing into the speculative and gothic as she animates her grief into a macabre and exquisitely haunted underworld. Hyperallergic, writes she meets the violence of her grief with poems populated by holograms, robots, and ghosts. A Pushcart Prize nominated writer, her writing can be found or is forthcoming Gulf Coast, Drunken Boat, The Collagist, Fairy Tale Review, and others. She's a contributing editor to Bettering American Poetry, the anthology, and is also the poetry co-editor of Apogee Journal. Currently, she's pursuing her PhD in creative writing and literature at USC, and she is from Queens. Yeah, Queens! Welcome, Muriel.
In absentia land, we become 2 tiny terrors in a dead year. 2 blitz countries and the artifact of sleep. In this world I pray, unshutter us. Once we knew newness like a wool coat. Now we sharpen our heads against stone. To be sparked back to life. there, says the tundra. What do you see? The primordial singe. Gifted 2 pairs of marble glass, we lay on a briar bed and place the glass over our eyes. This is how I want to love you. Mouth full of cyanide coat and the words that sit. By way of book and bone, we opt to mimic prey.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Jane for inviting me to be here tonight. And thank you to Carlina and to Christine for reading tonight. I've followed your work for so long and then have come across it so many times in passing. So it's wonderful to be able to hear you all tonight. And what a great lineup of badass Asian American women. Thank you so much for including me in that. Thank you to Asian American Writers Workshop, Sophia and Tiffany, for organizing all of this. I was an intern at the Asian American Writers Workshop in 2008, 2009, back when it was over near Warrijip, where I was not necessarily the best intern because I took a lot more boba breaks than I did the actual filing work. But it's wonderful to see how much the workshop has grown. And I hope that everyone here tonight continues to support organizations and spaces such as this for Asian American writers. And thinking about the theme of haunting tonight and related to Asian American poetry and poetics, I wanted to read a couple of poems from Bone Confetti, which is a book that I had sort of accrued over the years from my time in Louisiana and drawing from New York to Louisiana is a really interesting place because there's so much haunting, but there's also so much resilience built into that haunting. And so a lot of these images of ghosts and recurrence, I think, have really inspired a lot of the work in here too. And I would argue too that a lot of that has to do with so much of Asian American history and the history of erasure and reclaiming the history from that erasure. Hologram theory. Some things I am learning through the process of light and how my hand passes through the body screen of you, sitting there with your ham leg and hyperclear spacesuit. I love you, and I think sometimes you're the left half of my terrible beached heart. Its anvil worth is pleading with a dull whir of your projection. In many ways, this feels more real. You insist on a heavy dose of the day-to-day remote control dive forward. With this, I can make you say all the nice things like, I belong to your pretty little liver, or if you're on fire, I will burn with you too. When I want to hold your hand, I just hold it out towards the peachy static of your fingertips. You blink to assure me of the viability of our future in flicker light revisions. If I can no longer recall the spiny sensation of you, if I can no longer recall the spiny sensation of you against my thighs, then I will have to work harder and think less of the dead, of you jarred up in crystalline bath water, while your hologram bright face hovers across the dinner table. Let's not talk about that. Today you're taking on the origin of the color blue. And who decided to name blue anyway? It is so provincial. They say we are a vat of tingly particles moving aimlessly in the caution of our own waste, though sometimes we rest our fingers on the ghost of a lung that huffs the other body's good, hard air. Oh, I forgot to say earlier that the video that we just showed earlier is actually a piece that's from Bone Confetti. It's a video poem that is in collaboration with my partner, Matt Ornstein. Yeah, it takes place in a fictional in absentia land. So there's a serial poem inside the book. Paradise in a Fever Dream. At the fat lip edge of the world, there is a blue boat in cannibal water. Wearing a blue dress, I was confused for all species of animal and was devoured. You speak of an insistent love using all 7 tentacles, your 8th arm somewhere in the belly of a white whale. Though odd limbs, you row with such diligence, my teeth tiny oars. Drink so much salt we bloat and are succulent. I demand a planet audience during placid hours when tumbling fire leaps from sky to sky. We kiss and burn and kiss again. Shall we grieve today? How we begin our mornings. Crack an egg on your pretty head and let the tadpoles suck the runny yolk. I wake up every day thinking I am dead, then check, can I fasten myself to ledge like a barnacle? Is my mouth a prison of gilded words? If you touch my scales, will I turn fish and sacrifice? The rest of the day spent in silence. You go hungry. You go on and peck at fishbone and peel. I offer you trout and sticky fingers. If not, for loneliness, you would unhinge your jaw and gorge. To the gulls, we were bricklage of scrap metal and fruit pit, not enough meat to tender, though we welcome each slice of flying debris overhead. Pleased to find our ribs good and strong today. We are optimistic for the future, even if flesh begins as tomb, ends as tomb. I wanted to close with a long poem, something newer that I've been working on. They entrusted me with this clicker, which is a lot of responsibility that I didn't bargain for. Coming after finals, my brain is, oof, okay. This is to live several lives. Once, when I was very, very young, I studied the curious lives of bees, their steadfast and synchronous labor, thinking of what it means to be at once a colony and alone. A bee learns to become a malarian mimic, dressed as some other creature with a deadlier poison. A bee who is sometimes a wasp, sometimes a stinging beetle, sometimes larger than its small self. Each one working so hard to perform a sense of safety. Some nights I am thinking of the colony of my father and me and what the bees know to be true. To survive a history in the wild requires arduous labor of some effortlessly seeming toil, as in, I want to tell you about his commute. He smelled like leather and tobacco. He was a type of burning. He said yes often. The restaurant was a hole he fell into. Most nights I waited for him. When he was home, he was tired, that's all. Maybe I'm making this up. I can't remember. I asked my father once, "Do you ever get lonely?" Did he answer? I set out to write a book about, but it was about. Instead, after he died, was all that was left. Let me posit this now. The book, a labor, a means to measure the contradictions of one's life against another. He wrote to me in a letter, "You have to work hard. Your dad loves you." I am trying to be both a daughter, a ghost. In Ghostly Matters, Avery Gordon writes on the drive to narrate the history that hurts. It is about putting life back in where only a vague memory or a bare trace was visible to those who bothered to look. It is sometimes about writing ghost stories, stories that not only repair representational mistakes, but also strive to understand the conditions under which a memory was produced in the first place, toward a counter-memory for the future. To write a book is to write into a future, and I am not ready. There was a time I worked so much I couldn't sleep. R said I was a dense bubble of worries. They pressed my body onto the bed and said, "Rest, rest." And it was like a game how awful I was at it, that I would shoot up from the bed, out of their arms, back on the train, on the bus, to a faraway borough. I carried a suitcase with me as if I was going somewhere that was not the job, not the hive. I left too soon, the house, the bed, the quiet weight of R's couch, where we were watching each other. They said, "It's like you're a stranger." I don't know where this comes from. I know exactly where this comes from. We mimic the species closest to us who prefer a certain ideal means of survival. I think it's funny that the book is not about bees at all. I wanted to write a book about Orpheus and Eurydice, how they lived and died again, how hellish discovering that the journey was not enough, even at its end, that impulse to look back, which is like admitting grief is a form of self-sabotage. And then she was ash. Another myth. My father swimming across the bay from China's mainland to then British-occupied Hong Kong. When he was caught, he disappeared for a while into the fields. One can say he worked there and discovered the body as an ox that could keep on, even if the migration as a broken history we don't talk about. Mauricio Lazarato on a redefinition of labor in post-Fordist terms. What categories of labor have we exhausted? And isn't neoliberalism moving us faster than we can write it? What are you going to do, writer, if not study the economy of these pages? What currency is your grief? How do you write a history that is both yours and not yours, but an extension of an improbable future, in which the girl writes the book to become subject by way of sharing, the labor, a movement, into this future of unknowns, what language we are making with our bodies, with work, with hard work. I heard it from Mom, who told it, and can you tell it again? Is it work if it doesn't hurt, if you like it? Are you allowed to like it, the work? If it hurts and you are not sure if you like it, is that also work? For a while, not saying because it was bad form. My father had been complaining about a possible ulcer. He ignored most pains as he was accustomed. The book leaves out the story, which contains gold and tool and other objects not frequently featured in narratives of or witness. On the night before my senior prom, attempting to finesse the zipper of my gold mermaid dress that had stopped halfway up my torso, I was using an ineffective combination of coat hanger, paper towel, and butter. That night, my father came into my room. He told me that he had less than months to live. And it had accelerated in his body, not an ulcer, but a different monster. He sat on my bed and let the words hang stale in the air. I folded 20 times into his lap, the zipper on my side without any give, a gush of gold and tool scattered across the wooden floor. The next day, I danced into the dawn, shimmering in a devastation that looked and felt like a human-sized hole. Later, learning that there are some bees who live alone. I would tell this story years later with laughter, unsure what else to do. Perhaps all of this is to suggest that the book is not enough. Apologetically to everyone, I would say, I'm sorry that I wrote a sad book. The poet Arathi Warrior says in her poem Alive, I plan to love so loudly, my body abandons every demon harvesting me. Let me tell you a story which begins with a death and ends with a study of a life of labor, done with such seeming ease. It is like an art, the way it takes on this other life, the body as another metaphor, while also literally doing its job to write the story of itself, the words lost before they were ever spoken. But I suppose this is a way to remember with holes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Muriel. This is a way to remember with holes. That's going to stay with me for a long time. Thank you. Okay. Oh, there's a clicker for me too. So I'm going to read some poems too. I think that's maybe the last slide. Good slide. These are poems for the family members that I lost during the Great Leap Forward, which, as I mentioned before, was a Maoist campaign approximately 1958 to 1961. When you died. 5 years of fireflies and oil. 5 years of ants gnawing through red flags. 5 years of pockmarked suns, your face, each ray, each sweltering August. 5 years of unraveling, hair loosening from your crown like a rotten tooth. 5 years of how easy it is to split a frog in two. 5 years of pollen in your mouth, that bitter buzzing. 1 year of leeches along the spine, fattening. 2 years, a rat's good to eat. Another year, sun-licked pots, your birth year. The cold bones of a stranger's hand. The quiet year, no one wants to look at a gaping fish swallowing water endlessly. The 6th year, to place these flowers on or in the graves. When you died, I went to the library to find you. I stained a book on Maoist-era politics with the tomato soup I had microwaved earlier, and it crusted the page like a ridge. In the Grand Canyon or the surface of Mars in love, or an army uniform cratered in the blood of others. I am sorry I don't know which analogy to use, what to say to the fact of it all. 36 million deaths from 1958 to 1962, estimated, what no one talks about, called epidemic, not starvation. At my grandmother's grave in Jersey, the ground was as soft as a perfectly poached egg, and I almost plunged my arms into the soil to touch her, her purple jade bracelet shining, like the ring of an undiscovered planet, or a truant yam among all this empty clay. All that's empty. I am sorry to give you that hope. I did not plunge my arms into the earth. I held these Safeway flowers dipped in bleach and blue, these wrinkled petal faces drifting in gasoline. Air, this yawning gap between us all. The more things change, what remains the same? When you died, a river thawed just enough to see the eels underneath, but not enough to touch them. When you died, the husks of insects hung about in the wind, little suits of distinction. When you died, lettuce wilted each time you carried your brother home at night, his hair tangled with manure as if he was a crop in need of growth. When you died, you knew the different levels of relief. The moon follows another day hollows out bowl by bowl. And isn't that enough? Nothing is for naught, or so you were told and scolded by armies of ants. When you died, this hand prodding your back was not your country, not your youth rosy at the cheeks from the sun striking at noon, was not what you curled toward in the early morning fog and fury your breath sent skyward. When you died, you can have it all. Dried cabbage butterfly, clay to draw out impurities, rice straw, how to roll it up to make a bow. Can it hold fresh locusts if they come? Call them to come, call them to flutter in your ribs. Termites among the gums, an antennae for another day. Double cooked rice, decade-old ox bones, dug up, crushed, and boiled. You can have this, the need to ingest anything, even the interior redness of stars. When you died, I don't want to tell you how Chinese people died lining up for a corn oil sale, trampled from the weight of desperation and the ambered cake of the sun sugaring above. Or how bad men have held their hands around my neck, greedy as a fish eating another fish's eggs. What I want to tell you, I am a good daughter. I repeat this until my lungs puncture little star-like holes. consolations of my devotion. I am trying, a daughter breathing. I listen to the story of you collapsing in the kitchen, of my grandmother finding you, holding my infant mother, of mucus pouring out of your mouth like so many slugs. I am trying hard not to place my cold hand on your forehead to ease something devouring you inside out. The mouth should not sprout mushrooms, and if so, I would not blame your neighbors for eating them, for lifting your earthly tubers to their faces for a kiss. Researching, I am afraid of phrases like edemia and the euphoric stage, of poisonous food substitutes from the government. What the stomach does with too much water and nothing else. Who can turn into a bottom feeder fish like that? I loosen a balloon into the sky and it floats between two waterlogged storm clouds. What to do in the world of the living? I've always eaten what was given to me and then I eat it again. Chewed and chewed until everything coated my interior self with a silk sheen, greasing a pan, fat. The smear of oil along my arms, duck leg after duck leg, bones in heaps and stews in swelling heat. So many string beans, they sprout from my ears and warble my hearing. I'm trying to listen. Close to fate, fainting, also A, with a different tone, I, love. Who can fall in love, I, during a time of starvation, Faye. My mother fills an empty can of soup with water and swirls it until each speck of oil catches. How beautiful this twinkling tin. I've always loved what most people throw out. Broccoli stems, fish heads, the white of green onions and its dangling foot like an anemone, the rat tail of a radish. I dream of boiling the salty shells of pistachios, of gorging myself with compost, slick with nutrients. It was definitely not fate. It was Hoku and forced collectivization. It was the face of a man you'll never see. How he dined on fish eggs, briny pearls. No one's fate to eat old bird droppings, cotton clay. What can be plucked from corpses, roses in May. I told you I was afraid. Not fate. I ate and ate and ate. I'm your good daughter. In the Pacific Northwest, two deer stare back at me in the woods, their antlers pulled up toward the moon like arms reaching up. They watch me carefully and can barely breathe through their hot velvet noses. They know. Their fear trills around them, spitting dew on ferns. I want to slice their bellies open, to gather this otherworldly meat, to feed you until your eyes shine back and the slugs recede from your mouth. And when you've had enough, I'll drape you in their hides, ever warm. It takes some time, but the balloon arrives to take you away. For a proper burial, for a cornucopia afterlife, for a tender rot. The balloon lifts your small, emptied body up with its one tendril and you hover above the floor in disbelief. You whisper, whose ear is pressed to this floor? I bow, ever full. Your good sons, good daughters, good daughter. Before we kind of close out tonight and have like a little mini Q&A, I kind of want to do something a little vulnerable if you're all with me on that. I didn't tell anyone else I was going to do this, so. But with me thinking about the Poetics of Haunting and going towards the ghosts, a lot of what I think about in kind of speaking to ghosts and people who have passed is conversation and being actually able to speak to those ghosts, even if they are nameless in some weird way. I don't know the names of my family members necessarily who starved during that time period. But maybe if you want to take a moment to think of one question you would ask one of your respective ghosts. That could be a ghost of language and like a person, a place, doesn't matter what it is. Just think of that question that you would want to ask whoever or whatever that is. I'll give you a moment. And then if you are comfortable or vulnerable enough, we could all say that one question together. I'll give you a moment. Okay. If you're vulnerable and you're okay with it, maybe we can ask that question right now. What did you eat for dinner? Thank you. Q&A time. Thank you, Muriel, Carlina, Christine, for being here. And again, super amazing to see all of you out here. Maybe I'll start with a question that I'm particularly curious about, and then maybe someone in the audience has some questions too, and anyone can answer this. You feel free to, if you don't want to answer it, that's fine. But when I started this project, I didn't realize until I was looking at like the fifth poet I was working on, that the majority of the poets in this project were women or identified as women. And I think at the time my advisor was like, are you going to address that? Or like, what's up with that? And Muriel was just like, look at this, like, look at all these badass women up here. And I'm curious about maybe why. I'm curious why that ended up being that way in some ways or another. But what maybe about maybe matrilineal lineage holds that sense of, I don't know, haunting or intergenerational trauma, or these stories that seem to be passed down potentially matrilineally.
I think there's something to be said about, I think like it's in part like gendered labor of having to carry certain burdens with you intergenerationally. So I know that for me, it was my mother. Before that, it was a grandmother. And it is always these really strong women who sort of bear a lot of things, just bear a lot over the years. And I think that burden, when you watch it unfold, as I was growing up, that's sort of learned behavior. And then there's also, there's studies that show that like cells carry memories of trauma. So I think there's a lot of that too when we examine ideas about Asian American mental health, when we look at the certain ways in which the histories that we learn about ourselves unfold, and even just in all of our work, I think there's some aspect of what does it mean to be a good daughter, which I think, okay, so we're all wrestling with that question, and none of us have any answers, and all of us are poets, so clearly good daughterhood is kind of out the window there. Whoops.
Oops. Yeah, and I think I would just add, like, Jane, you were talking about kind of conversation earlier, and I think for me, growing up in a household, it was always really interesting just bearing witness to and having many conversations with specifically my mother about both childhood but also myth, and sort of straddling the line between what is the myth of good daughterhood and what is the myth of motherhood in some ways. And I think that is a question that continues to haunt me, and sort of the notions of language around girlhood, and even the opportunity to transition into girlhood or into daughterhood, I think is one that I've really struggled with in my own work. And so thinking a lot about just conversations and stories as a daughter, just bearing witness to and having the ears to listen to that from a mother has been really powerful for me.
I don't have very much to add.
All right. Christine, I feel like I sense that you're saying something to me without saying it. I don't know. Maybe another question I would ask. Maybe this is a bit of a strange one, but in this project, majority of the writers that I worked with either wrote me kind of like answers to some of my questions or did an interview or something of that sort. Banu Kapil was the only poet who actually was like, I'd like to record something that's more of a meditation or an offering. And in her recording, she's actually setting up an altar, or there's like this like egg that's there, and she refers to this egg a lot. And she's just kind of talking to me through a meditative egg for like an hour. So it's a very curious dialogue with like, it's a dialogue in the sense that I'm there, but I can't speak back to her. But maybe my question is, what do you put on your altar? You can take that whatever way you want to take it.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So sort of like our altar of anything. It can be of anything? Okay. I think for me, the first thing that comes to mind is really plump peaches. And I think I say that because thinking about a lot of the poetic work that I'm sort of trying to write my way through and have written about in the past does have to do with that haunting and that history. And I can't help but think about a very specific instance. Last winter, actually, I went to go visit my grandparents who are about to turn 90 in China. And my grandmother was giddy beyond relief that I was there and kind of, ran as fast as she could, AKA shuffled very slowly, into her kitchen and kind of wrenched open the freezer and was like, here, I've saved the peaches from last summer for you. And they're in this Ziploc bag. And they've been sitting in my freezer for like 6 months. Please eat them. And there was that sense of this like intergenerational love that exists between family members that you don't see very often. You don't even have the language to even communicate with, but that sense of love being so strong that you would save last summer's ripest pick for your granddaughter. And I think for me, when I think about altars and I think about kind of giving grace and worship and love to either, I don't know, family or myself or even language, I think a lot about the notion of just saving someone's ripest pick, loving someone so much that your heart busts outside of your body and you're like, here, take my peaches, even though they've been coated in ice because I saved them for you because I love you. So I think I would put a bag full of juicy peaches.
Yeah, I love that so much. Okay, I'm gonna think about that for next time. I keep an altar, somewhat, back at my apartment in Los Angeles. I have by a mirror. I have a series of wooden boxes that were gifted to me by my friend Kati during her last trips to El Salvador, which was the last time she saw her grandmother. So I think it was a very important gift because this, in a trip that meant so much to her and her family, I think she thought enough to bring that back. And I think it carries with it that sense of family and memory too. And there's a tiny, tiny box that comes with it. And I've gifted that one to another friend of mine who kept losing an even smaller trinket. And so she keeps it in that box now. And so I like that idea of it sort of having this ongoing legacy. And then there's also a broadside or a printout from Shan Shan, which just says "Stay Mad" on it.
I get really overwhelmed by physical objects, so I don't have an altar.
It could be a cloud. It could be a cloud. Oh, okay. I think my answer to that would be skyflakes. You know that okay. Some snaps for skyflakes crackers. It's a check out that cracker if you haven't. It is a special saltine. But my grandpa would eat skyflakes all the time, and I would just leave packets of skyflakes. They have a new garlic flavor. I don't know how new it is, but I see someone's like, yeah. I mean, it's really good. But there's something about crackers. You can eat it at any time. I guess peaches too, but as well as you can probably eat broadsides and clouds too, but in another way. Does anybody in the audience have a question?
This is for all of you. Considering that your art and poetry navigates your relationship with ghosts, how do you materialize the imagery for those poems? Like newspaper clippings, pictures, any particular sort of like gateway into the sort of ghosts that you're looking for?
You mean physical objects?
They don't have to be physical, but
I mean, I guess like old family pictures, old memorabilia, they don't go directly into my work, my poetry, or my visual work per se, but they definitely inform or set up my mental space for it, because there's no other. I don't know. I don't speak. My Chinese is not very strong, so I don't communicate with my elder relatives as much. So you kind of, in a way, imagine or create your own historical narratives. By you, I mean me looking through old photographs.
Yeah, I would say for me as well, it is also a series of old photographs. I think particularly because the ghosts that I write about deal very directly with family and sort of that, for me, that missed, in some ways, that missed sense of you are my blood, and yet there is that kind of ghost of language that's there that I can't directly approach or access this ghost in that way. And so for me, it's family portraits, it's music. My father, I grew up kind of in a car where, not in a car, but I grew up riding along with my lovely father, who would sing a lot of Chinese opera. And so in recent years, I've been trying to like go back and dig through specific, tracks or artists, or even like the instruments, like the guzhong that he really loved singing to and playing along with. And I think for me, it comes from that window of memory in terms of how can I comb through this specific memory and look for very visceral clues or like of sound, of image, of anything, and kind of pinpointing what those are and kind of tapping into them.
Yeah, no, and a lot of Chinese, not maybe like funereal practices like baisan, like which is literally like pray to the mountain, where like every year our families go and we visit the graves of our ancestors, and we make food offerings, we light incense, and then everything's sort of bound up in this ritual of doing everything in three. So you pray 3 times, north, south, and that sort of ritual, I think, is what's instilled in you. And then I think you also, at least for me, I carried it in my everyday life, these ideas of ritual, doing something in threes and wholes, and but also communing with ghosts in such a way that's, I think, very different than Western ideals of ghosts, where I think ghosts are kind of, in Western ideals, are treated as this thing to be feared or you want to excise. But I think this notion of ghosts, it never feels like it translates so neatly across, I think, Chinese cultural practices, because I think you kind of talk to them as if they're of this plane, but they're currently elsewhere. So there's an aliveness to it. But there's also a spectralness to it too.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to think about it. When I was working on this project, I think most people were like, I ghost, scary, or like, actually, when I commissioned the artwork, this is by an artist named Min Win, and when we started brainstorming, she was thinking about, black and white, and I was like, well, what about color? Or like, let's think of something alive, because I feel like for me, ghosts are very much alive, and kind of what Muriel was talking about. I feel like for me, in terms of the materials, I definitely go back to family photographs. I think more than anything, just listen more closely, so that when my family's telling me stories that wouldn't necessarily connect to historical narratives, I now tune my ear towards that. So for instance, my mother has crazy fashion sense, and since I was very little, I had like a purple rabbit fur bomber jacket. Like, take that in, with like bejeweled buttons, and her crazy closets. Like, she has like 10 closets. She's a total pack rat about that. But I have to listen closely, because I'm thinking that probably came out of, communist China, like where she couldn't really dress the way she wanted to. And coming to the States and just like going crazy on all the outfits that she wore, like paying close attention to why she loves these clothes so much. There's a story underneath that. And I think there's a story underneath a lot of things if we just listen more closely to, I guess, those kind of ghostly remainders. Maybe one more question? Maybe if there's one or two.
Hello. Firstly, thank you all. This was really nice. My question is mainly for Carlina and Jane, but I think that all of you might have something to say, or if not, that's fine too. You both mentioned food in your readings, and especially this idea of kind of being a good daughter and eating and eating and eating, and coming from a Filipino background, food was just shoved in my face all the time. And you mentioned kind of eating for ancestors and people who weren't able to eat before. So my question is kind of how are you thinking about food, and how does food work in terms of kind of self-identifying, but also what's the significance of it, and what does it mean to you?
Well, first of all, I love food. And I think, so to me, it's really interesting thinking about the way that food functions both in my relationship with my parents, and then also as it functions, I guess, more poetically into the written work. So first, in terms of the way that I think about food, I had a really complicated relationship with Chinese food specifically, where growing up, my mom would make, mounds and mounds of delicious pork fried, green beans, whatever. And I would refuse to eat any of I wouldn't touch it. And I would instead eat bowls of white rice with goldfish crackers, or the Lay's, the sour cream and onion chips, sprinkled on top, little confetti, and then ketchup, the quintessential American dream. Really? Yes. Yes, with ketchup, and just drizzled all the way on top. And so I think growing up, just from a young age, had this really weird, maybe unconscious, weird relationship with Chinese food, where I was I'm not gonna touch that. I'm gonna use the ketchup bottle. And so from there, and that has led to an interrogation of what does it mean? What does it mean to consume, and what does it mean to, in some ways, accept or consciously or unconsciously reject, roots, and reject a sense of self. And so I think about that a lot as now that I'm no longer 10 and no longer feel attached to a ketchup bottle, but also just in terms of I guess my own writing, I think a lot about ethical portrayal of food, and how so often when people are looking to read Asian American literature, they are looking for the chopstick story or the story of the pork buns. And how can I write about the consumption and sort of my own relationship to my mom's beautiful buns and beautiful dumplings and chopsticks and whatnot in a way that doesn't feel like it's necessarily catering to what has been imbued in culture to expect of Chinese food, or of I guess, of Chinese consumption. And so I think maybe this doesn't directly answer your question, but I think for me right now where I'm at writing-wise is thinking a lot about ways of how to authentically write about that complicated relationship with eating, but also with desire and with what it means to be a body and to be a Chinese American body, and even identify in that way without necessarily catering to that confined box of what other people want to read into that whole experience.
Muriel, Christine?
I mean, like Jane, I grew up in a Chinese restaurant, so
Restaurant babies!
yeah, so I always had a lot of access to Chinese food. But I was similar in the sense where, like, my mom would make really amazing and large Chinese meals, but I also just wanted like rice with ketchup, ketchup on it, which sounds so gross right now. And whatever we didn't finish eating came back the next meal, and whenever we finish eating that meal, came back. So I got into this habit of just putting the food in my mouth and just sucking on it and just letting it sit there, and I wouldn't even swallow it. And I think a lot of it had to do with like just kind of like feeling embarrassed and feeling ashamed for being Chinese, because I grew up in such a predominantly white community and white culture. And I think like now food appears quite a bit in my poems too, kind of as a reclaiming or a taking back of my identity and self through consuming these foods that I think I was once very embarrassed by to eat. Yeah.
Yeah, all those above things. My relationship with food is very, very strange. I think about gluttony a lot. My mom, whenever we would have big kind of family gatherings, if we go to like a Chinese restaurant or something, we would always order everything that had meat in it, right? And I was, at the time, I think I was dating a vegetarian or something. And the vegetarian was like, oh my God, like overwhelmed by like all the like duck heads and everything. And I had to stop and think, you know, my mother had, again, I had to listen closely to what she was just rambling about something, but then she had mentioned just gonna, you know, just matter of factly, oh yeah, I used to get meat on my birthday. Like, she was vegetarian because that's all she could afford when she was growing up. And the very fact that this like vegetarian ex-boyfriend was kind of like disturbed by how much meat there was on the table, you know, it was a moment in my mind thinking about, you know, how my family now is, you know, so proud of the fact that they can provide all this meat on this table and to eat as much as you possibly can, until literally I feel like I'm slimy. Like I feel weird. Like I don't know if anyone gets this. I call them pork palps, meat beats, you know, that sheen that you get. And it's like, it's otherworldly. I don't know. It's my way of communing with my ghosts, I guess, is that I feel like I'm eating for them, because, you know, it's not that big of a generation leap. You know, my grandfather was the only one who survived, and, you know, his and he just passed away this October. And, you know, my mother said, like, he'll finally get to see his sisters again. He wasn't able to see them, you know, since they were like basically, you know, kids, young adults. And I think that there's something to say about that gluttony, and I love it. Like I feel like I can't help but be sickened and like feel like I'm in sickening glory when I'm able to eat. That sounded really like weird. I'm like looking at a roast lamb just like floating in the ether right now. But yeah, maybe that's a way to answer that question. I think that it's a celebration. It's a means of communicating, I think, for me. Yeah. Maybe we have time for, I don't know, are we running out of time? Help. One more question.
Hi, my name is Christy, and I'm a longtime fan of AAWW, and I really appreciate all of your work so much. I feel so affirmed and seen and heard. I've definitely been thinking about ghosts and about food and family a lot lately, partly because my great aunt just passed and I had to take off work to go and sort of like represent my immediate family at the funeral because my mom had to leave for work and my brother had school. And so, sorry, trying to like be coherent. And like, I also think about being like what it means to be a good Chinese daughter a lot because, so I'm from Flushing, and I still live there now, and being a queer, like a visibly queer Chinese American woman in Flushing, it's kind of lonely because I feel like I'm pretty much the only one who expresses my gender, which for me is very much connected to my sexuality. Like I'm the only one who really expresses it in the way that I do. Like there definitely are like low key, like I feel like queer or just like gender non-conforming like Taiwanese immigrants, but like queer like Chinese Americans, that's like something kind of different. And so I shared my queerness with for the very first time with my cousin at my great aunt's funeral while we were both putting the spirit money into the fire. And it felt so good to do that and to finally feel safe enough to tell that to somebody in my family. And especially since, like, I love my mom so much, and I think she loves me too a lot, and she shows it very much through food, and I think that I'm slowly gaining the courage to maybe one day share this part of me with her, because I think that she would do her best to accept me. And yeah, so it's not a question, but just sort of like a positive story that I wanted to share with y'all in the spirit of vulnerability and like Chinese American daughter feelings. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. That was really brave of you to do. And I think we all up here struggle with this idea of being a good daughter and feeling accepted by our family. Yeah, and what you're going through is hard, and you are definitely seen and definitely heard.
Wow, what a night. I don't know if like I'm just crying and blinking away tears or just the lights are bright or everything. Things are happening to me. I don't like crying in public, so I'm trying to hold this back. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you all for being here. Thank you to these amazing poets here. Can I have a huge round of applause for them? And thank you so much to the Asian American Writers Workshop. It's a dream to be here. It feels like such a good, warm space. So I'm really glad to be here. And I hope you all come up and say hi. And thank you all for being here. And I hope you explore the website too. It's meant to be kind of just, you can meander through it. And buy their books because they're amazing. So thank you. Thanks for coming out.